I'd like to introduce Paul Bambrick, who is going to talk about how the trees in his diorama are produced. Paul.
This is a piece of caravan or speedboat battery cable, and it's the multi-strand cable they use. It's similar to heavy-duty earthing strap for welders and so on. And that's basically what we would start with for making one of these trees. And you just use the separated wire strands and so on to actually produce the armature and so on. So it's available on eBay and Amazon and so on, and you can buy it by the meter. And it's 500 amp caravan battery cable. So that's the first thing, is to basically, is just to mail order yourself enough of it to be able to make a few trees. Start with maybe a couple of meters. And from there what you do is to take enough to make your tree, with allowing yourself a bit more space and a bit more length at the tops, so that you can, and you twist it up into your basic single trunk there and so on, and run super glue down and capillary the super glue down into the tree trunk.
Okay.
Once you've got to that stage, it's a question of basically separating the branches and twisting them out into the configuration that you want for the particular tree, whatever your reference happens to be, whatever kind of tree you want to make, is to study the winter tree, the shape of it, and start to separate the cables into suitably sized branches and boughs and so on. And that will give you the basis then to start producing your tree. So basically it's just a question of taking away each one and twisting the strands together until it's time to take away and produce another twig or branch or bough and so on. You just continue basically knitting the tree up and just twisting it up.
So do you
until you get the shape that, until you start to build the basic shape that you want, whether it bifurcates evenly or whether you have large branches with much smaller ones coming away. All of those things need to be taken from the reference of a winter tree and effectively produced until eventually you wind up with the basic skeleton of the tree you want. Once you've got to that stage, you can then start to super glue the individual boughs and so on, and you effectively seal the shape of the tree, and it becomes a lot more sturdy. Then from there you can basically then take each one until eventually you completely run out of cable, multi-strand cable.
Do you photograph a real tree and use that as a reference?
Photograph a real tree, or you can go onto the internet or any kind of reference photographs and so on. And you really want to pick the actual structure of the tree from a winter tree, because you can see then exactly how all those branches then bifurcate and they diverge and so on, and you can judge then whether you would have, say for instance there where you've got one larger branch coming away with one smaller one here, and you would incorporate that into the structure of the tree as you go along. You can add and stick branches on and so on, as people do, but in a way the first thing you want to do is to actually plan the basic shape of the tree from there and so on. And eventually what you would do, by the time you get that done, you wind up with a tree which is largely finished, and you've only got either one or two ends and so on, and you've gone basically with the structure and the armature of the tree as far as you possibly can. You can't make any of the smaller twigs that go on the end, but you've twisted it to the point where you've got only single strands left at the end.
Okay.
Like that, basically. From there are things you can do. Basically, you can PVA the trunk and use tree bark mixture onto the trunk and the lower boughs of the tree to get rid of the twisted wire look and so on. That's after you've super glued it and so on. And beyond that point then you can use aerosol sprays to spray the colour again to whatever reference you've got. Beyond that point then, you can use the quickest way to put the canopy on is to use Woodland Scenics polyfibre, and you basically then put a little dab of white PVA onto the ends of each one of the single wire branches here, and then you basically then lay the polyfibre, you tease it out as far as it will go, and then you rest the polyfibre onto the outer branches like that, and just basically wait and let that dry. So that's the thing. That can all then be sprayed again in camouflage, matte greens, greys and so on, according to reference and so on, and you're ready then to start applying the foliage scatter. And again, the best thing to do with that is have lots of different colours and then mix each colour ever so slightly differently for each tree that you do, and you'll get then a natural variety. Obviously you need to go back to reference for the colour, and you can also match the greens to the greens that you've used on your back scene as well, but that's basically the sequence that we use for that. And that's the same with all the trees on the diorama, are basically done the same way.
So how long does it take to make a typical tree?
Well, if you're going to use one like that, that's going to take you, that might take you 2 or 3 hours to make the armature by the time it's all super glued. It doesn't take long to do the other processes, they're very quick. Okay. The time really goes into twisting it up into a nicely arranged armature like that. And then you might find that there was maybe 3 hours or so to do that one, 4 hours for a big O-gauge one, 4 or 5 hours.
Right.
But obviously the smaller trees that you would find, line-side shrubs, trees to go on the back scene further back and so on, you can do one quite easily in half an hour. It depends. These are just bigger versions of the smaller sort of line-side ones that you make. Yeah. But you get the knack of doing it, and you can. It's obviously the more you do, the quicker you get. But that's the sequence that we've used for that. Here and there, you might also you might use a sea moss tree as a base. Yes. And then also, so they're introducing as much variety and different shapes and colours as you can.
Have you got a sea moss example there you can pick up and show us?
There's a sea moss one there.
Can I just zoom in?
Yeah, so there's a typical sort of line-side sea moss tree there. That's the sort of thing.
Right, they do look quite good actually.
They do look quite good, and the best thing with realistic scenery is to study the natural variation that you get, and all of with trees of course you would have areas and all of the undergrowth and the leaf mould and twigs that have fallen down and then bracken and nettles that grow underneath it is just as important as planting the trees, otherwise it tends to look a bit like an orchard.
Yes.
So natural growth, the under forest floor if you like, is just as important to model as the trees themselves.
And do you do the undergrowth before you plant the trees?
Yeah, you can do, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You can hold the tree in and go, that's where I want it, then lift it away again for the time being, and then make sure that you've got a really nice job of all the forest floor and stuff.
Here we have the basic form created with the wire, and it's been twisted together and the twists super glued so they don't separate. It's all been taken out to single strands. Here we have the tree with the bark put on with PVA and just sort of spread on, so you end up with a nice sort of bumpy look to it. And we just started to put some of the greenery on the top of it. And finally the tree is complete. And trees are pretty much hollow inside. The greenery is very much on the outside of the tree. So you end up with a nice looking spaced out tree rather than a lot of trees you see on models that are just far too solid.